The sun had barely risen over the roofs of Ibadan when Tolu stepped into the buzzing market streets, her feet dragging slightly behind her. The sky was the color of pap water, soft and gray, with sleepy clouds that looked like they hadn't decided whether to rain or not. All around her, life moved like normal. Hawkers were calling out their prices, women were bargaining loudly over peppers and tomatoes, and Kiki drivers were honking impatiently at goats crossing the road. But Tolu barely noticed any of it. Her school uniform clung to her back with sweat. Her legs felt shaky, as if they could give way any moment. She gripped the black nylon bag in her hand tightly. Inside were 3 packs of sanitary pads. Not because her flow was due, but because it never stopped. She was only 17. A bright SS3 student of St. Agnes Girls' Secondary School. She used to laugh easily and read novels during lunch break. She used to dance in front of the mirror, pretending she was a star on TV. But now, all of that was gone. Her period started like any other. On a Monday morning, just before assembly. But it didn't stop after 5 days. Or 7. It continued, silently, steadily. Heavy. Constant. Like a tap someone forgot to close properly. At first, her mother said it was normal. That sometimes girls had irregular periods. They waited, prayed, and bought painkillers. But by the second week, Tolu was pale. By the third, she couldn't walk to school without stopping twice to catch her breath. Doctors at the local clinic said it was hormonal imbalance. Maybe it's stress, one said. Another wrote down the name of a drug that cost more than a full bag of rice. They gave her injections. Tablets. Syrups that tasted like soaked coins. Nothing worked. The flow only worsened. At night, she would wake up to soaked bedsheets. During the day, she carried an extra wrapper in her bag just in case the pad couldn't hold it all. There were days she bled so much, she couldn't sit up without her vision going blurry. Tolu didn't understand what was happening to her. She just knew something was wrong, something deeper than the doctors could explain. And as she walked through that Ibadan market that morning, pushing through crowds with trembling hands, her body whispered a quiet, terrifying truth: this wasn't normal anymore. This was something else. And whatever it was, it had just begun. What if your own body betrayed you? What if you woke up every single day, bleeding, and no one could stop it? Not doctors. Not pastors. Not even your own mother. This is not just a story of pain. It's the unraveling of a secret buried beneath blood, shame, and silence for 18 years. And tonight, you're about to find out why her period won't stop flowing. If you are yet to subscribe to this channel, you are wrong. Please subscribe before we continue. Ibadan's heat pressed down like a thick, wet blanket as Tolu sat slumped in the back seat of her mother's Kiki. Her chin rested against her chest. Her hands, once full of life, now trembled like leaves in harmattan wind. The bleeding hadn't stopped. If anything, it was worse. Her mother, Mama Tolu, didn't speak. She just looked straight ahead with red-rimmed eyes, the way only mothers look when they're carrying both fear and faith on their back. They had gone from one clinic to another. Small ones. Big ones. Government health centers with broken fans and peeling paint. Chemists in Dugby that claimed they knew what to do. Nothing worked. First it was painkillers. Then injections. Then bitter herbal mixtures bought from an old woman under a tree at Oye Market. This one day flush any evil for body, the woman swore. But Tolu still bled. Heavily. Day and night. Then someone mentioned UCH Ibadan. They have machines, they said. Big doctors with foreign degrees. So they went. But even in the crisp white halls of the teaching hospital, answers refused to come. The first doctor blinked hard after examining her. He called 2 others. They whispered in the corner. Then came the tests. Blood work. Scans. Hormone charts. Still, no explanation. Tolu was now skipping school entirely. The few times she managed to go, she sat in the last row, wearing 3 pads at once and still soaking through her uniform. On one terrible Tuesday, she stood up to answer a question, and blood dripped onto the floor. Students gasped. A teacher screamed. And just like that, her name became a whisper in the school corridors. That's the girl that bleeds non-stop, maybe it's spiritual. She must have done an abortion, God forbid. The shame was as heavy as the blood she couldn't control. Then came the fainting spells. She'd be standing, then the world would suddenly tilt. Her knees would give way, her eyes roll back, and she'd collapse to the floor. At home. At school. Even once inside the church, right in front of the altar. Doctors began to avoid her mother's calls. One nurse at a private clinic even pulled Mama Tolu aside and whispered, "This kind thing. No day ordinary again. You need to go deeper." Mama Tolu didn't believe in all that. But the way her daughter now looked, bones under skin, lips dry, eyes distant, she began to wonder. Something was wrong. Something big. Something no injection could fix. And deep in her heart, a question began to echo louder and louder: if science can't stop this, what will? The search for a cure had turned into a race against time. And something unseen was watching, waiting, bleeding her dry. The road to Osogbo was long and filled with silence. Mama Tolu didn't speak much, and Tolu barely had the strength to lift her head. Her skirt was padded thick with cloth, but still, the bleeding soaked through. A stranger in the taxi had offered her water and whispered, "Your child's problem is not hospital matter." That same week, an old neighbor, Mama Kafayat, had leaned across the fence and said words that refused to leave Mama Tolu's head. "Go to Osogbo. Near the sacred grove. There's a woman there. A seer. She sees beyond what eyes can." By dusk, they arrived in a quiet village on the outskirts of Osogbo, not far from the Osun Osogbo sacred grove. The air felt heavier there, like it carried secrets from long ago. The trees whispered when the wind moved, and the ground felt oddly warm under their feet. They were led down a dusty footpath by a barefoot boy into a clearing with an old mud shrine. Red cloths tied to wooden poles flapped in the breeze. Cowries and feathers littered the earth. A thin trail of smoke rose from the thatched roof, carrying the scent of incense and camwood. Inside sat Mama Iridi, her skin wrinkled like old bark, her eyes sharp as firelight. She didn't greet. Didn't smile. She just reached for Tolu's hand and closed her eyes. What followed next chilled the air. Mama Iridi screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was something ancient. Something that made the ground hum beneath their feet. Her eyes snapped open, wide with horror. "Who opened the gate?" she hissed, pulling her hand back like it had touched something cursed. "This girl, this child." She stepped on blood that was never hers. Tolu's mother gasped, grabbing her daughter's arm protectively. But Mama Iridi was already chanting, her voice low and sharp. She circled Tolu 3 times, tossing cowries onto the ground, then stared down at the way they landed. "It wasn't meant for her," she said again, this time softer. "But she is carrying it. The blood that was spilled is calling her. And it won't stop. Not until it takes what it was promised." The candles in the room flickered violently, even though the wind outside had gone still. Mama Iridi raised her hand. "This child," she said slowly, "is walking in a shadow. A shadow that began long before she was born." Tolu looked down at her legs. The blood hadn't stopped. It had soaked through another pad. Another wrapper. And in that shrine, under the red cloths and the eyes of gods long forgotten, something else had just begun. Whatever this was, it wasn't sickness. It was a curse. And curses never bleed quietly. The fire in Mama Iridi's shrine crackled low, casting long, jagged shadows on the wall. Tolu sat in the corner, her head heavy, her body weak from the bleeding that never ceased. Her skirt was soaked again. The wrapper tied around her waist had turned dark red. She didn't speak. She just stared at the flames, blinking slowly. But Mama Tolu stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth trembling. Mama Iridi had gone silent. Her cowries lay scattered across the ground, untouched, as though even they refused to reveal more. Finally, in a voice soft as night rain, Mama Iridi looked straight at the mother and said, "The blood is not flowing because of her. It's flowing because of you." Mama Tolu's legs gave way. She dropped to her knees, gripping her wrapper, shaking. Tolu turned to her, confused. "Mummy?" But the woman could not meet her daughter's eyes. The words came out slowly, broken, ashamed. 18 years ago, before she became the respectable wife and churchwoman she was now, Mama Tolu had been desperate. Fresh out of secondary school, alone in Abeokuta, with a growing belly from a man who had vanished like smoke. She tried to end the pregnancy. Once with bitter herbs from a woman in Itoko. It failed. Then with an injection from a nurse in a Digby. Still nothing. The third time, she went deeper, into the hands of a spiritualist who promised a silent cleanse. A ritual that involved a white cock, menstrual cloth, and blood drawn from her left thigh. It was done under a tree, at midnight. Afterwards, she bled for days. She thought it was over. But the baby lived. She didn't speak of it to anyone. She ran away from Ogun State, started a new life in Ibadan, raised her daughter, and buried that chapter deep within her soul. But now, Mama Iridi had unearthed it with only a touch. The old seer stood and poured water into a rusty iron bowl. She placed a red stone inside it and watched it sink. "You were born under a blood debt," she said to Tolu without emotion. "And the river is collecting what it's owed." Silence filled the shrine. The kind that wraps itself around the bones. Mama Tolu wept silently, her face buried in her hands. Tolu didn't cry. She simply turned to look at her mother, really look at her. For the first time in her life. And something inside her cracked. Not just from the pain. Not just from the bleeding. But from the terrifying realization that she had been born, into a promise she never made. And now, someone, or something, was demanding it be fulfilled. Night in Ibadan carried a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the usual peace after a long day. It was thick. Heavy. Like the city itself was holding its breath. Tolu lay on her bed, drenched in sweat and blood. The wrapper beneath her had soaked through to the mattress. Her mother had stopped changing the sheets. It made no difference. New ones would stain before dawn. The bleeding no longer shocked her. But the whispers? They were new. They started as faint echoes in her ears, soft murmurs like wind brushing past dry leaves. But then they became voices. Breathing. Laughing. Chanting. At first she thought it was a dream. Until she opened her eyes. And saw him. A figure stood on the roof outside her window, tall, motionless. Its body was cloaked in something dark and tattered, but its head was a goat's skull, bleached white, with twisted horns that curled back like claws. It watched her. Every night. Sometimes it moved. Sometimes it didn't. But it was always there. And when she blinked, it vanished, leaving behind a fresh stain of blood beneath her. Shops started closing when she walked by. Women would touch their chests and hiss, "Blood child." Men crossed the road to avoid her. Even beggars stopped stretching out their hands when she passed. In school, it was worse. Her classmates whispered behind lockers. Her seat was left empty, untouched, even when she wasn't there. The headmistress called her mother twice, once to say teachers were uncomfortable, and again after a disturbing event in biology class. Mr. Ade, the teacher known for his strictness, had called her to the front. She walked forward slowly, dizzy from another sleepless night. He reached out to hand her a diagram paper, and their hands brushed. He collapsed. Just like that. Eyes rolled. Body trembling. Foaming at the mouth. They said it was a seizure. But the way he woke up, screaming, pointing at her, shouting, "She's not alone. Something stands behind her." No one ever forgot. By the next morning, her name was written in chalk on the school gate. Tolu the cursed her mother tried to pull her out. But there was nowhere to run. Tolu knew it. She felt it. Every shadow. Every whisper. Every drop of blood. The thing that followed her wasn't just a curse. It was alive. And it was getting closer. The church in Akure, Ondo State, was known for fire. That's what they called it, Fire Mountain Revival Ministry. A place where demons screamed and chains broke under holy anointing. The prophet, Apostle Elisha Ojo, had been whispered into Mama Tolu's ears by 3 different strangers across 2 states. He sees deep, they said. He prays and spirits tremble. So they took Tolu there. She was now barely walking, her body thin and hollow, her eyes sunken like someone twice her age. The blood hadn't stopped for over a month. Pads no longer helped. She bled through everything. Yet she followed her mother into that bright, echoing sanctuary, the air filled with shouts, songs, and sweat. The prophet didn't touch her at first. He just stared. Then he called for a 7-day fast. No food. No fruit. No flesh, he declared. Only water and the word. This one needs separation. She must dry the river in the spirit. Tolu obeyed. She tried. Day 1 was agony. Day 2, she couldn't stand. On day 3, she walked barefoot into the church at dawn, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist, face pale, lips dry. The altar was shining white marble. Clean. Holy. She made it to the front. Her knees buckled. Then the blood came. Rushing. Pouring. Dark and endless. It soaked the altar steps, running down the tiles like something freshly killed. People screamed. Ushers ran back. The choir stopped mid-song. Tolu collapsed into the blood, face first. The prophet stood over her, hands raised, frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at the blood, then at her. And then he stepped back. "This is no longer deliverance," he whispered. "This is repayment." No more prayers were said. No more tongues were spoken. Only silence. Even heaven, it seemed, had paused, watching a girl cursed before she breathed, and now drowning in the debt of blood she never owed. The journey to Ogbomosho was quiet. No prayers. No crying. Just the sound of tires humming against the road and the faint rattle of bottles clinking in the boot. Inside the back seat, Tolu leaned her head on the window, eyes half closed, her body hollowed by the blood that would not stop. She no longer asked why. Only when it would end. They reached the riverbank just before dusk. The priest was already waiting. He was nothing like the others, no flowing white gown or holy theatrics. Just a man in red cloth, sitting beneath an ancient tree, his eyes dark like coals soaked in kerosene. Around him, the ritual space had been prepared, calabashes, ashes, feathers, a chicken with tied legs, and 3 broken clay pots filled with black water. He didn't waste time. He touched Tolu's forehead and said, without blinking, "This is not just a curse. It is a contract." Then he told the story her mother could barely listen to. When she tried to abort the pregnancy 18 years ago, the third attempt, the spiritualist in Abeokuta didn't just cleanse her. He performed a blood ritual, sealing a spiritual promise: if the child lives, the debt must return, in blood. That promise was made on earth, but witnessed in spirit. The place where the blood first spilled during that failed ritual, that soil, was the altar. And the only way to reverse the covenant, was to return to that very ground. Dig it up. Offer a cleansing sacrifice. And release the blood spirit tied to it. But the priest's voice lowered when he said the final part. That land, is no longer land. It had been sold. Paved. And now stood as a petrol station in Abeokuta, Ogun State. Fuel pumps. Concrete. Oil-soaked earth. The place where the curse was born had been buried under years of asphalt and ignorance. Without the original soil, the priest warned, no ritual will hold. No sacrifice will silence this debt. Tolu stared at the river. The water didn't move. And for the first time, she understood. This wasn't just her fight. It was the consequence of a decision made long ago, one that refused to stay buried. And now, it had come back for payment. No matter what it cost. Midnight was close. The air over Abeokuta had turned strange, thicker than usual, like it was holding its breath. A fuel attendant yawned outside the filling station, unaware that just behind the wall, 3 people were digging through concrete and soil with hands trembling from fear and urgency. The spot had taken hours to find. Mama Tolu remembered the tree that no longer stood, the curve of the land, the exact place where she had bled under the moonlight nearly 2 decades ago. Now, that sacred ground was hidden under oil drums and foot traffic, but the spirit had not forgotten. The ground still remembered. The native priest, the same one from Ogbomosho, had come dressed not in robes, but in red powder. His face was marked. His eyes unblinking. He said very little. He just began. The shovel struck dirt. Then stone. Then dust. Then, silence. The wind, warm all night, turned cold. It was midnight. The priest lit a fire in a broken calabash. It flared high, unnaturally blue. He pulled out the last ingredients. Goat blood, black soap, ashes from the Ogbomosho River ritual, and the wrapper Tolu had bled into for the last 40 days. He began to chant. Not loud. Not soft. Just steady. Like he was knocking on a door no one wanted to open. Tolu lay on the ground, barely breathing. Her eyes rolled back. Her skin like wet paper. Her breath came in sharp, broken gasps. Then it happened. The wind screamed. The fire shot up in a sudden twist. The air smelled of smoke, blood, and something older than time. Tolu's back arched. She gasped. And then, she vomited. Not food. Not water. Blood. Dark. Thick. Endless. She choked, coughed, trembled, and then, stillness. The bleeding stopped. No more flow. No more pain. For the first time in weeks, her body felt light. Her breath returned. Her eyes fluttered open. Mama Tolu dropped to the ground, weeping uncontrollably, pressing her forehead to the dirt that had nearly claimed her child. But the priest was not smiling. He looked down at Tolu, his voice dry as harmattan wind. She's free, for now. But if this cycle is ever broken again, if another promise is made, another blood is spilled where it shouldn't be, she won't survive the next flow. They left before dawn. And as the city of Abeokuta began to stir, with pumps humming and taxis honking, no one knew what had happened in the shadow of that station. But Tolu would always remember. Because her blood had spoken. And this time, the spirits had listened. In every choice lies a consequence. Some are instant. Some wait 18 years. Be careful what debts you create. Because blood always comes to collect. Like, share and subscribe if you want more chilling stories from Dixon Luxurious Stories. Comment below, have you ever heard of a blood curse?